The president of Poland says there is absolutely no evidence indicating that a missile that crashed into his country, killing 2 local farmers, was fired by Russia intentionally. In fact, he believes that it was likely a Russian-made missile that was part of Ukraine's air defense system, and that missile inadvertently, accidentally landed in Poland. However, they're still blaming Russia for the ultimate war and how it, of course, is gonna lead to some of these unintended consequences. Ukraine defended itself, says the president of Poland, which is obvious and understandable, by firing missiles whose task was to knock down Russian missiles. The Russian side is to blame for this tragic event. And look, to some extent, he definitely has a point. After Russia lost territory in Ukraine, specifically Kherson, Putin started to do an increased number of missile strikes, especially in civilian territory, specifically focusing on civilian infrastructure. And this is typically what he does. So for instance, Russia fired 96 missiles at Ukrainian cities on Tuesday alone, after being forced to withdraw from the southern city of Kherson last week in a major blow for Moscow. A missile landed in a Polish village near the Ukrainian border, killing 2 farm workers. Now, following the incident and following the preliminary findings of this investigation, Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelensky seems to reject the notion that this was a missile that was part of Ukraine's missile defense system. He thinks that that's not true. He's completely blaming Russia for this. And to be quite honest, after news broke that there had been a missile that landed in Polish territory, killing 2 people, I was impressed with how measured the United States response was to it, how careful and calculated Biden was in responding to it, because you don't want to needlessly spark World War III before you do an investigation. Zelensky, on the other hand, was a little belligerent in his remarks, and I'm gonna give you his statements and what he's currently saying in regard to this investigation in just a moment. But first, some more info regarding the talks that occurred after this incident. So for instance, Polish officials said late Tuesday that they were considering asking NATO countries to begin special high-level consultations. Those consultations, known as Article 4 in reference to NATO's founding treaty, are a step short of invoking the alliance's mutual defense pact, known as Article 5. I mean, Article 5 would mean they're going to war with Russia. So they're not asking for that. But they are considering Article 4. However, at the NATO ambassadors meeting on Wednesday, Poland chose not to ask for Article 4 consultations at this stage, a Polish NATO official said. So it doesn't appear that there's going to be any escalation from the fact that this missile landed in Poland, and that's good news. Poland summoned Russia's ambassador around midnight Tuesday for a 4-minute meeting that occurred without any exchange of courtesies or handshakes, a Polish foreign ministry spokesperson said. The government wasn't ruling out expelling the ambassador, but also had made no imminent decision to do so. I would not expel the Russian ambassador from Poland. I can understand the tensions, I can understand the fears and the worries and the anger toward Russia, namely Vladimir Putin, but you have to maintain some avenues for diplomacy. And I think expelling the ambassador kind of cuts that possibility off, and I don't think that's a good idea. Now, Ukrainian officials are now calling for NATO to declare its airspace a no-fly zone, which they've been demanding since the beginning of the war. That's also a bad idea. No-fly zone means that NATO countries are now directly at war with Russia. That means that NATO allies would be, including the United States, of course, would be shooting down Russian planes, Russian aircraft, Russian weaponry, whatever it is. And you don't want to be in a direct war with Russia. That's also not a good idea. That's also an escalation of war. And considering how Ukraine's been able to take back some of the territory from Russia, I think that it's unnecessary to do this, to needlessly escalate the war. Now, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said that there was another hysterical and frenzied Russia-phobic reaction in the West following reports of the incident in Poland, which was not based on any real data. He said the government in Warsaw could have been more restrained and professional when addressing issues that could escalate a situation. But this is the interesting part. He noted what he described as the restrained and much more professional reaction of the American side and the American president. And you know what? He's right. Biden did do a good job. In fact, here he is responding to a reporter at the G20 summit.
Can you tell us what you know so far about the explosion in Poland, sir?
No, that's the Biden I like. Okay, no, I don't. I'm not going to comment on it. I don't have the details yet. I'm not going to needlessly say something that could be inaccurate, that could, inadvertently escalate the war. No, keep it simple. Keep it simple. Okay. Later, when he had a few more details about what occurred, he answered some questions. This was about an hour later. Let's take a look at that.
Mr. President, it's too early to say whether this missile was fired from Russia.
There is preliminary information that contests that. I don't want to say that till we completely investigate, but it is. It's unlikely in the minds of the trajectory that it was fired from Russia.
That was a perfectly fine reaction. I mean, just waiting to see what really occurred, waiting for an investigation, using belligerent rhetoric toward Russia when you don't have all the facts yet is not a good idea. It could, again, increase tensions, it could escalate the war, more people could die as a result. And really, what we need to push toward is a peace deal. And it really does suck that on the day that Vladimir Zelensky shared his 10-point plan toward peace, meaning his openness to potential peace negotiations, this incident occurred, and hopefully that doesn't throw the possibility of peace negotiations out the window. But unfortunately, the same can't be said of Vladimir Zelensky when it comes to, waiting, being patient, holding back, and not engaging in belligerent rhetoric. So he said this: hitting NATO territory with missiles. This is a Russian missile attack on collective security. This is a really significant escalation. Action is needed. Okay, he should have retracted that, number one, because it turns out that it wasn't an intentional strike by Russia. And it appears that the missile actually belonged to Ukraine and was part of Ukraine's missile defense system. Now, Zelensky denies that, he rejects that. I don't know why. I mean, why would Poland want to lie on behalf of Russia if Poland is genuinely concerned about a security risk here? It doesn't make any sense. He had also said immediately after the news of this missile incident, he also said Ukraine has long warned the war could spill across borders and added it's only a matter of time before Russian terror goes further. I can totally understand his frustration. This war has been so incredibly brutal to Ukraine, to Ukrainian civilians. It's been a complete and utter disaster. And Zelensky has fought back. He refused to flee the country. I think for the most part, he's been a pretty good leader, but he's got to put his emotions aside and be careful in what he says and what he accuses Russia of. Because again, that could also escalate the war. And this is basically a major step back after he had shared his 10-point plan toward a peace deal. And also Financial Times reporter Christopher Miller says this: Zelensky live on state TV refutes Western leaders' statements and preliminary evidence that missile, which killed 2 in Poland, was Ukrainian. I have no doubt that it was not our missile or our missile strike. We have to participate in the investigation. So he's denying it, but again, I really fail to see how Poland would benefit from lying on behalf of Russia if Russia did in fact do a missile strike in Polish territory. It doesn't really make any sense. But we'll keep an eye on the story and fill you in as we learn more. But for now, hopefully there's no indication that there's an escalation in the war in Ukraine.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.